Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. Alongside me today is Blake Alexander from Alexandre Family Farms. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Ryan. It's great to be here.
So this one's pretty special for me, and I know for a lot of Regenaissance followers because they use and absolutely love all your products that you've been able to provide nationwide in America. And so I guess before diving into the world of dairy, would love to just hear, the backstory of Alexandre Family Farms being a fifth generation farm to, was it always a dairy farm when you first started?
Yes, yeah, by fifth generation, we mean fifth generation to milk cows and graze cows. And on my side of the family, that was my great grandfather who had immigrated from Italy and started a dairy farm in Ferndale, California, 100 years ago. And our oldest son, Joseph, and his wife now live down there and run that farm. It's about 100 miles south of where we're at. So, it's truly a family heritage. And, dairying is not a career that a lot of people would choose, but it's a career that we inherit. We never really inherited much land or anything like that, but you kind of inherit the work ethic and the commitment and the 7 days a week. And, it's often not, a desirable thing for, say, college educated folks that go to an ag college and come out. They're always looking for something quite different than a dairy farm.
What was that experience like growing up for yourself then?
For some reason, I absolutely always loved it. Just totally. When I was 16, my license plate reads "Love Cows," and I still have that car and that license plate. And then somewhere along the evolution of growing up, 20 years later, I was into organics, and so now I would say it would be love soil, and because that's even more important than the cow. But of course, the cow is the tool to make the soil what we need it to be to fix our environment in the long term. But so, what was it like growing up? For me, I grew up in Ferndale, California, 150 cow dairy, two sisters, one a year older, one a year younger, and kind of a very old-fashioned family where my sisters took care of things in the house and I took care of things outside. They would come out and help once in a while, but I always thought they were getting in my way. And so it was very traditional, old fashioned. We changed a lot since then, but that's what it was like.
So you mentioned organics. I'm assuming then before learning about that, in terms of the actual dairy farm, what was the process like for all of that? I'm assuming it didn't start out as organic.
Right. Correct. And so I talked about my grandfather's farm, which was started by my great grandfather, but that wasn't the farm I grew up on. My parents had a farm that they had leased and rented for 38 years, and that's where I grew up. So that was really home. It was 7 miles away, and I think I always dreamed of buying it and owning it. I think my dad did as well. It never happened, so we never bought that land, and it sold to someone else. And so, as I went away to college, coming home to a farm that really wasn't solidly in the family wasn't an option, and yet I still chose to come home, help Dad for a few years, and then met my wife Stephanie at college. She had grown up in Southern California on dairy farms, where she's also fourth generation on her mother's side here, dairying. And so we had that in common. And at one point, an opportunity came up. A couple years after college, we got married, and we moved to Southern California and leased a facility in Chino, California, which for me was 800 miles south, getting out of Ferndale and kind of learning large-scale dairy, confinement dairy, very, very different than I had grown up with. And so that was a really wonderful experience to have the contrast between, kind of the small and the large scale in a sense. We ran about 500 cows on a 40-acre farm down there, and always knew that it was a temporary move. And so after 4 years, an opportunity for some land came for sale up here, um, where we live now in Crescent City, California, in Del Norte County. So the extreme northern county, right on the coast. We're about a mile from the ocean. And so we bought land here and kind of have been dug in and strapped in financially really deep for a long time. That was about almost 33 years ago. And this is where we raised our 5 children. We're now 100 miles north of where I grew up in that small community of Ferndale. But we've always been involved because my parents were there. Well, my grandfather, then my parents, and now our son. And so it's a wonderful community to be part of. And we're really thankful and blessed that we can be part of both of these communities, milking cows in two counties.
So I have two questions based off of that. The first one being, you mentioned just moving around and having different pieces of land within the vicinity. Did you, whenever looking for land as well to try to start your dairy farm, did you try to keep it close in the proximity of your father and great grandfather? Did you have just that sense of wanting to be close to that, or is that just how it ended up happening and you found a good piece of land within, the 100 or couple 100 miles around?
Yeah, I think when I moved away, I didn't. It's crazy. I get all choked up. I didn't know the results of that move, and I don't think I expected to return to this region. And really thankful that we were able to make it work. And so I was leaving kind of small scale ag and venturing off to large scale ag is I think what I had. I had a desire to own my own place. And I think then, marrying Stephanie, we had a desire to own and move. And the area that we were living in Chino, a lot of young people our age were moving to other states because they were, kind of pioneering new areas to build large scale dairies. And so I think we probably thought we would be one of them and do that in some place. And so when the opportunity came here for 500 and some acres that came for sale, and it was an opportunity to move, back into my home region, it was really exciting because dairying here on the coast with pasture is a heck of a lot more difficult than running a confinement operation where you basically have your cows corralled up in different groups and you just feed them differently and you buy all your feed and you're not really farming, you're just managing people that are managing cows. And it's a much simpler approach to making milk. And I think in the United States, the farmers have gotten really good at that model. But the model that we've embraced, which is, this old fashioned graze the cows, lean on the land, and use the cows as a tool to harvest the feed, as opposed to mechanically harvesting and bringing it to them, is a different approach. It's got a lot of inefficiencies because the cows don't give as much milk. It's harder to move ahead financially and get things paid for. However, there's tremendous benefits, and as 30 years ago when we started looking into organic markets, we were really chasing the financial side of that and looking for an increased milk pay price, really looking for an opportunity to make our farm profitable so that our children would grow up and may consider our farm as an option for them. And that turned out to just be an absolutely wonderful move. So we were the ninth dairy farm in California to become organically certified. So relatively early adopters. That happened in the late 90s. And then in 2001, we finally got a milk market established. That was in August of 2001. and started selling milk and helping two different groups develop their organic milk program here in California. And and then that eventually just kept snowballing and leading to different opportunities as different things opened up for us. But it was a really nice adjustment from a confinement farm where we were trying to compete with a lot less cows and a lot more work than those large scale operations that were being built across the country.
So when you mentioned with being the ninth organic dairy in California, especially back then, because it's made me wonder, why does California, compared to most states, have essentially the best raw milk laws to where you could go into a grocery store and buy raw milk? Is this part of the reasoning why is because they were so early on, say, the organic dairy? Because I've always been surprised by that, considering a lot of the other politics for California as a whole.
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that question. I think that raw milk ordinance has been in place for a long while, even before raw kicked up, or I mean, before organic kicked up. And so I'm not quite clear on that. There are 4 counties of which raw milk is not allowed, and that happens to be the county I grew up in. And so it was a little confusing to us. We did have a raw milk cow share up here in Delaware County for quite a few years until somebody got really sick, and so we moved away from that. And so we were really excited to come back, with an organic program, and eventually an organic brand of milk, which we started in like 2016 and then launched in 2017.
So specifically for milk too, what equates to it being just organic labeled milk?
Yeah, the basic requirements are fairly straightforward. So, like everything in organic, you have to certify the land, and that's a 3-year process from prohibited substances, which would be chemical fertilizers and pesticides, herbicides, and anything that might have been applied to the ground that wasn't an organic application, or applied to the crop that was growing on that ground. So you need 3 years of a clean bill of health, basically a detox period for the land. Then you can certify your land, and now you can grow organic feed that is qualified to feed to organic cattle. And it takes 1 year to convert an animal back then. I'm not sure that we even have that conversion option anymore. I think now that organic law is that organic replacement dairy cattle need to come out of an organic cow. So they need to be born into the program. And for maybe 20 some years, 30 years, you could convert them. And so a lot of us got started by converting our old herd, feeding them organic feed for 1 year, and then running with an organic program from there forward. Relative to raw milk, that was also kind of moving slowly around, certainly around our state in California. The organic milk price was much less, um, but it was more. Uh, I think the market share was much larger, and so it was easier to sell 1,000 gallons as opposed to selling 100 gallons at a time, or whatever the math might be.
And then in terms of, because you hear like homogenized, non-homogenized, there's just all kinds of terms within dairy now. If we could just talk a little bit more on just that as a whole to educate. Um, if you can just explain, well, because there's two actually things too, with just dairy for raw and then dairy for pasteurization. But then also, like I mentioned, there's just so many different terms within that. If if you could just highlight on that.
Sure. We were absolutely raw milk enthusiasts for a long while, and had a cow share program where almost a couple hundred families were coming here and getting milk. And it was really nice to have all those ambassadors in our community, um, that were part of just pulling in and grabbing milk and leaving. And it felt like we were doing a lot of good work, and of course a lot of health stories that you know followed and were part of that, where people were having a real transition to their personal health because raw milk helped them. And all that kind of came to a screeching halt when somebody got sick and connected it back to Campylobacter, which easily could have come from our milk supply. And Campylobacter is very common. That's what is foodborne illness and basically all food poisoning cases that we see every day in the United States, 150,000 of them a day. And this particular lady got really sick, and so we had to shut the program down. We knew her; she was a personal friend, and it was a real challenge. So we had to leave the raw milk venture, and we sat tight for another 5 years or so, and then started to realize that we were breeding our cattle for the A2 genetics, which is the more digestible version of milk. And so a lot of people, as they leave the conventional milk market from the store and they start drinking raw milk, they say, "Ooh, I can digest it without any difficulties." And that's usually true because the enzymes are more present in the raw milk. Um, However, a lot of folks also can't digest milk because they believe they're lactose intolerant. And I think I've come to realize that 90% of those folks really are intolerant to the protein that's in milk that has been mutated. There's a mutated gene in the protein of milk where there's literally a histidine uh, replaced by a proline. Or a histidine replacing a proline. And it's a simple little 209 chain amino acid with that one little character out of place at junction 66 and 67. And so that gets in people's digestive system and literally in your mouth. It's what makes the phlegm and the mucus in your throat. It's why doctors say stay off of dairy when you have a cold or your flu or something. And healthy dairy, A2 milk, doesn't do that to you. And it doesn't cause the digestive downstream issues. And some people are just, it's a little pain in their gut, extreme diarrhea, right? Whatever. So 2/3 of the world's population believes that they're lactose intolerant, virtually all of Asia and a lot of people. And it's a growing number. There's more all the time that are intolerant to dairy. And when we learned about the A2 protein and this A1 mutated gene that's prevalent in the dairy industry worldwide, really, we in the we just it made a lot of sense to us. For the first time, we understood why some consumers can drink goat's milk, but they can't drink cow's milk. And there's got to be more to that story. So, as we learned about the A2 movement, there was a book written in '08 by Keith Woodford, scientist from New Zealand, Lincoln University, and it explained the story. And so then, once you know that knowledge, we couldn't unknow it. And so within a year or two, we were starting to DNA test our animals to find out which cows inherited the A2 gene from both sets of parents. And when they got the A2 gene lined up from both parents, then we call them A2. And that's why our label says A2 milk. And so we built our herd and started separating and segregating the cows. And then we only bought bulls or semen that carried A2 gene. So again, the male received A2 from both of his parents. And so as we're building our herd and wanting to sell an organic version of A2 milk, there was nobody interested in marketing that. We were members of Organic Valley for a while and other regional groups or dairy processing and co-ops. And we just couldn't get anyone to do it. We tried to get the A2 Corporation out of New Zealand, who does sell the A2 milk here in the United States under the A2 milk label in the conventional world. But they weren't interested in doing an organic version because their conventional product carried a large margin and markup relative to regular milk. So So they had no motivation to do that. And so finally, in '06, '07, we just partnered up with some former Whole Foods employees who talked us into starting our own brand and helping us. And and that's kind of how Alexandre Family Farm label was established. And we launched our first products in September of 2017, so a little over 7 years ago.
What was the decision behind going to the route that you took of supermarkets rather than, as you mentioned previously, with raw milk, you had the herd shares and just working directly to consumers?
Yeah, once we understood this, it felt we felt a responsibility as dairy farmers to try to fix dairy and try to help dairy help more people, literally, with their personal health story. And we firmly believed in organic because of the organic influence on the land and the biology and the soil and the earthworms coming back to life. And so we saw that evolution of our farm, and we knew that, wow, it's healthy for the environment. And then it grows healthier feed, which is now healthier for the cows, which makes milk that is healthier now for people. And the whole system, the whole ecosystem is really healthier for people, whether they're our neighbor breathing the air or drinking the water in our region. And so as that just, you think that through and you try to make a difference, across the country. I remember sitting in Washington, D.C. once talking to a lobbyist with Farm Bureau who said that, I would love to be able to buy A2 organic milk out here. And, at that point, I had no desire to put milk across the country. That wasn't Yeah, so we had no desire to establish a brand, nationwide. That just seemed overwhelming. And anyhow, I just always remembered that experience with this gal back in D.C. And so I thought to myself, if I could ever help her and help young families across the country, um, we would do everything we could to help make that happen. And so one of the philosophies we developed somewhere along the line, just personally with our brand and products, our eggs that are high end pasture raised eggs and our milk, is that consumers have a right to pay more to get more. And if that's a true statement and they're our neighbor, well, the neighbors at the other end of the state have that same right, and the neighbors on the eastern coast have that same right. And it just appeared to us that nobody was trying to make that happen. And so we were the only organic A2 milk brand, which, was selling digestible milk. And so we thought of ourselves as a dairy milk brand that could bring consumers back to cow's milk from the alternative milks that were really rampant at the time. And I'm really glad that that was our attitude, because it bothered us that there's young mothers out there thinking that feeding their child nut milk was a good thing. That's just not the case. That's I just think of it as dirty water with nut sprinkling in it. It's not nutritionally sound, and so that bothered us, and we wanted to do our part in helping fix that across the country. Well, first in our region, and for the first 3-4 years of our launch and our brand, we clearly thought we were only going to do the 3 western states and maybe trickle a little bit outside of that. And then things just kept coming together. We were making yogurts that had a long shelf life, so those could certainly travel further. We had a great relationship with Whole Foods, and they were willing to take our products nationally. And then eventually we found a way to package some milk with a longer shelf life that was different than what we chose. And so I'll spend a minute talking about the vat pasteurization and the ultra high temperature pasteurization and the high temperature short time pasteurization of milk. Those are the 3 things that are common in the industry. And well, no, there's 2 of those that are common. The vat pasteurization is extremely rare. It's very old fashioned, but it would be how people in other countries pasteurize their milk in a pan on top of a stove or over a fire. And so when we launched, we wanted to be different. We wanted to be a bit of a dairy disruptor. We wanted to do things unique and truly give consumers a choice. And so we decided to be a very high fat company because all the nutritional goodness from the grass is really wrapped up in the butter fat of the milk. And so we launched with a 6% butterfat milk. Most milk across the country is 3.25, so almost double that. Here in California, it's 3.5. And then high fat creams and high fat half and half, which are half and half is 16%. The industry standard is more around 11. And just so on and so forth. And so high fat yogurts and eventually a high fat kefir, which also has the long shelf life and goes national. So our launch with our products, and as we were sourcing a processor to make our products, we knew we wanted to do yogurt and these high fat milks. And we had an outfit in Oregon willing to do it for us and co-pack for us, and until they said no 5 months before launch. So that put us in kind of high speed to find a facility, and there was one here in the Bay Area in California, about 350 miles north of the or south of the farm, and we bought that facility, rented the building, but bought the equipment, took over the business, and it had 2 employees at the time. Today it's got about 30, and so we've been growing a lot. But processing our own products, which gives us tremendous control over quality, and experimenting with new products and moving forward at a much faster pace. Yes, it came with a lot of inefficiencies as we were small and starting, but I think we've overcome a lot of that and we're getting through it. But we chose vat pasteurization, which is these large insulated tanks where you put the milk in there and you just warm it up to 145 degrees for about 30 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't remember the exact rule because I keep getting confused, but we hold it for about 30 minutes. And so it kind of gets a bit of a cooked flavor and a cooked odor flavor. And when I went to college, we were taught that that's a bad thing. And turns out it's once you get used to it, it's really fun. It's a nice aroma, and our consumers really appreciate it. We've had plenty of older gray-haired folks that were from other countries that would taste our milk at a grocery store and tear up and say, "Wow, this is exactly what it smelled like and tasted like back home."
Hmm.
And so we knew we were on the right path with that approach. And so vat pasteurization is a slower, more methodical path to getting to where you're going, and that's how we process our fluid milk in our bottles, our yogurt, and our kefirs, and now our sour cream. And we started in about 2020 with UHT, which is ultra high temperature pasteurization, not at our plant or at our creamery, but at a neighboring creamery owned by Albertson Safeway. And so they toll or co-pack for us. We send them a few loads of milk, and they package it up in half-gallon cartons that then are eligible to go all the way across the country. Our short shelf life products with a shelf life of 25 days or so, it's just not too much of it would spoil on the other end if you were trying to haul it and truck it across the country. It just, the timing and logistics of that are just way too inefficient. And so now we had a package, a half gallon, even though it was UHT, but that fit the bill for that young mother in Washington, D.C., who wanted to have an opportunity to buy the best milk that she possibly could, which is organic, A2, regenerative. And yeah, it was processed slightly different. So maybe there's a little nutritional give on that, but we've done a lot of nutritional studies, and the nutrient characteristics of our milk that make us unique are still there. So It's worked out well for us. It's a more convenient package for a lot of consumers. I remember my mom liking that because it can last in her shelf for a long time in her refrigerator because she didn't drink a lot of volume. And so that's how we got into where we are with the two methods of pasteurization that we choose to use.
So with that, because I know that was some questions and I guess concerns from folks on just the topic of dairy as a whole, comparing raw milk to the pasteurization process, and then comparing the the beneficial bacteria and enzymes, but then also the vitamin and mineral content. Um, I would just I'm trying to figure out how I can formulate the question. I guess whenever the concerns folks have with drinking, say, your milk versus just going straight raw, with the concerns of does the pasteurization kill off beneficial bacteria and enzymes for your immune system and your gut, but also just your health as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, hope you
So
could shed light on that.
yeah, I don't. I believe the answer is yes. It kills off some biology, but we're targeting and we're trying to kill pathogens and things that might cause harm to people. And let's just say that Campylobacter did exist in our milk at one point by mistake. That really harmed one person that we're fully aware of. And so we, as we're serving 1 million units a week here now, and there's a lot of people and a lot of room for error. And people buy milk at the grocery store and they haul it home in their car, and things happen. They have to pick up the kids or drop them off or whatever, and we don't know the temperature of that milk right during that last few mile ride home. And so there's a risk here when selling dairy products. We're trying to minimize the risk and maximize the health. There's nutritional companies that do milk sampling or product sampling that are getting that carton milk of ours out in the Midwest somewhere and running samples and saying, you guys have the best milk in the marketplace. You need to be bragging about it nutritionally. And we're about to kind of wrap up a 1 year study. I didn't want to just run with what they were saying in our finished product. I wanted to measure the milk on all five of our dairy farms and make darn sure that we understood the difference between the farm that's been in the family for 100 years and the one that's been in the family for 3 years, and the nutritional difference of the management of those soils and things like that. And so we are doing our homework, but our milk tastes and is better for a lot of reasons. And so the CLA content, the conjugated linoleic acid that helps fight tumors, that is present in our milk still at a huge rate. And that there is no difference between that and raw milk. So the nutritional factors that also come from the vitamins and things that are present because of the fact that our cows eat a lot of forage and our grass. So our cows also split into two groups, one being 100% grass fed, where we don't feed any concentrates. And so the omega-6 to 3 ratio on that milk is 1 to 1 basically,
Wow.
which is perfect. That's what
Yeah.
God intended for us to eat. And our other milk is about 4 to 5 to 1, and that's still darn good. That's about a little better than the national organic average, and then the conventional average would be even higher than that. So we're getting it done nutritionally as well as we can, but we have to process milk and package it so that consumers can handle it, and there's some wiggle room for them to make an error and not get sick. And so our counter to that was to make probiotic products like yogurt that are super super good and great for your gut. And so through that you pasteurize the milk to take out the biology that is potentially harmful, because you don't want to incubate and stimulate those guys. you so you got to have a known substance where you can control the biological growth, which is the culturing process of making yogurt or making kefir. And so when we started with yogurt, 7 years ago. We started with kefir about 2.5 to 3 years ago. We spent a lot of time researching and getting a lot of really good sound advice and searching the world over for the right um, cultures or inoculants to grow those kefir, the kefir that we make. And so our kefir ends up on the shelf with trillions of colony forming units, and everybody else is talking billions. And so I truly believe we have the best probiotic dairy product out there, and we have a real comfort in knowing that it's quite safe. And so I would literally be afraid to culture raw milk into something, right? That doesn't that's playing with fire in my eyes. And I'm the raw milk advocate, so I've come a long ways, because now we've got a team of employees that are making, like I said, 1 million units a week, and there's a lot of room for error there, right? And there's a lot of opportunity for error there. There's no room for error, and so we have to be extremely careful. So if we're going to feed America, and we're going to make products available to everybody because they have a right to pay more to get more, then you've got to have a sound, thoughtful process in presenting your dairy products.
Thank you for explaining this. This is one of the things I was looking forward to having this conversation because, like you were mentioning, hearing about just your products in the Midwest and Illinois and just people raving about it. That's what's so incredible and why I'm so grateful for everything that you're doing. And I mentioned something on Twitter, and that's a lot of people were just so grateful that we have the ability to go into stores nationwide, such as Sprouts or Whole Foods, and find your stuff there. And it is incredible because the taste is so much better than because I grew up on looking back, I grew up on big dairy, just very pasteurized skim milk and 2%. And it
Yeah,
was just
yeah,
disgusting,
yeah,
awful.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I can't
It's
believe I used to
literally,
drink that stuff.
yeah, it's watered down compared to what we do. Yeah,
It's
so
literally.
our carton milk is 4% butter fat, and we do have a 2% version for older folks who grew up thinking fat was bad for them, and that hopefully that the need for that goes away at some point, and people really understand we're a high fat company. And
So, with that, then too, because you also mentioned just your experiences within large dairy operations, confinement operations. I, I'd be curious to hear what that experience was like and how that helped. I guess just with your thinking, with everything that you're doing for your own farm, and just how you've gone about that operation. Because from the consumer standpoint, and my thinking, it's just you already know that you're going to be pasteurizing it, and so is the quality and the care of the animals really taken into account fully, and the type of feed and all of this. It just feels hard to trust any of that dairy, and it makes sense why you can get so many gut issues and skin issues drinking this type of dairy compared to say yours.
yeah, so let me first tell you what I know about large scale confinement dairies, right? Um, the dairymen in the United States have gotten really, really good at managing those cows and managing the entire operation. And the cows are milking more volume than ever before. And they fine tuned their nutritional needs and their comfort. And so they're doing an excellent job at taking great care of the cow in a confinement situation, and bringing all the feedstuffs to her. And if they don't do a great job, then they fail. They economically can't compete with their neighbors. And so by and large, dairy farming at a large scale on these confinement farms is the definition of taking great care of cattle. However, we as consumers, we as people want to humanize these cows And we compare them to what we think they might feel like, and what they might be going through. And so obviously what Alexandre Family Farms believes in is a more natural approach, and opening the gate basically, and letting the cows go out and graze and forage and convert the feedstuffs that are growing in our fields to, meat and milk and eggs in our chickens case. And I think that's the system that, in our case, God designed, and we're now just caretakers in that process. And so cows weren't designed to be corralled up and locked up. That's more of a, human efficiency thing that has created that model. And so there's a huge movement here in the last 20 years of consumers waking up and understanding that cows probably belong on the land. And yet we've got an entire movement of environmental types that are, activists saying that, all animal agriculture is bad. And that's where I really start to get a lot of heartburn, and we want to push back, because it's not true. It's absolutely not true. First of all, those confinement farms are taking great care of their cows, or they wouldn't be in the farm, or they wouldn't be in business. But that's according to a different set of standards. So we're out here grazing our cattle, at least 300 days a year. When it's not pouring down rain, we get about 80 inches of rain a year, in this northern county where I live. And so we have to protect them from the weather as well. But our cows are out, doing what they were intended to do. And that's kind of rotational grazing, where we let the grass get 2 feet tall and then kind of put them in there in a small 3 acre, 4 acre piece, and they eat it down intensely. And then the field rests for another 50 days or 60 days. And we kind of just repeat that cycle over the year. And we're blessed where we can graze our cows 10 and sometimes 12 months a year. So it's a much healthier and different situation, where the cow is healthier in that she's walking more and eating a more natural diet, and her pH of her rumen, her stomach, is making the CLA content that's high, and the omega-6 to 3 ratio that's ideal. And so we've got that advantage. Nutritionally, on the rest, I don't compare. I don't know. I believe we're coming out ahead. And our cows are part of the solution to, say, global warming crisis. If that's your point of view, then our cows are out in a setting where they're sequestering carbon, not emitting carbon. And let me kind of explain that. So about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, we started hearing the word regenerative agriculture. And we didn't know what that really meant. It was hard to understand. We asked our daughter Vanessa to represent our farm with these two different groups that were running pilot farms across really around the world. And so we were part of two groups, 3-year study. And then when we were launching that extended shelf life milk in cartons, we knew we were regenerative. We had told Whole Foods, and Whole Foods says, well, hey, do you have a certificate or any documentation? So we went back to those two groups and said, we're launching next month or two, and we could use something that verifies that, who we are and what we're doing. And so both of them granted us a certificate, and we became, America's very first certified regenerative farm by both of those groups. And that was Land to Market Savory Group with EOV, Ecological Outcome Verified certificate, and then the ROC, Regenerative Organic certificate. And so that was awesome. That was a neat honor. We got a lot of publicity over that. We were on the Today Show. We did a lot of podcasts, and so I've always kind of felt a little regenerative weight on my shoulders, trying to be a spokesperson for that movement. And I'd like your listeners to understand really what that movement is. It's an awakening and an awareness and a brand new word to explain a very, very ancient old system. And I'm going to say it's a system. Well, I'm just going to say Adam and Eve were the first regenerative farmers that I'm aware of, and it was designed. We were, designed with this planet to have ruminants grazing and eating forages and converting this really tough cellulose material that's in the stems of plants that a human can't digest, and converting that into proteins and fats that we can then digest. And so as we move through evolution of time, we've gotten away from that, and milk is milk, and a cow is a cow, and that's not true. It's more about how we manage that cow as to whether she's contributing negatively or positively to our ecosystem and our environment. And I fully understand that now. And we've always known that we needed to pay attention to biology and soil biology and the fungi and just all the health that's in our soil potentially, which makes healthy roots and plants. And because of that, this regenerative movement just came natural to us. And it's really opened my eyes, and it's made it easier to manage our lands in that we now understand what the goals are. And it's literally a lot of fun to take old, worn out dirt, fields where they grew in our region lily bulbs, flowers with a lot of chemicals, and bring that soil back to life. And it's a lot of fun. It's very rewarding.
I I worked on a farm in rural Pennsylvania, fall of 2022, and I mean, long term, I want to have my own ranch because it is the most rewarding work I've personally ever done in my life. But you also mentioned, it reminds me of the quote, "It's not the cow, it's the how," and that's just such a perfect phrase for it all. And then also going back to why I have the name Regenaissance, because it takes two words, regenerative, as in regenerative agriculture, but also our body is just so resilient. I mean, like your liver, for example, could literally just heal itself as you take proper care of it. But then Renaissance, because as you mentioned too, just going back to how our ancestors have always been. And then that's why I also chose the bison, because they are so incredible for our land, and trying to bring them back as well. It just made a lot of sense. And so it's been really cool to see, because I know before we went live on this podcast, I was mentioning how I heard about regenerative in February of 2022, and even just seeing the 2.5 years since then, it's the growth is just crazy. It's just awesome, especially on social media, on Instagram, and I've started using LinkedIn, and even seeing regenerative agriculture on LinkedIn has been incredible. So I guess my next question, then, just going back to kind of just talking on the raw milk and vat pasteurization too, and how you're talking about the portability and just providing this amazing quality milk nationwide. And then in tandem with, say, Mark McAfee and Raw Farms, but then also just what I'm trying to push too is just supporting locally as much as possible too, if you can. Do you see a world where there's more raw dairies propping up, but then also other dairies doing what you're doing? Because I'd be curious to see what happens in the future with just all of dairy, considering more and more people are waking up to just to the whole education of it all, essentially.
Yeah, Stephanie and I were in Pennsylvania 3 weeks ago for Soil Health Academy, and then we drove down to Virginia or through Virginia on down to North Carolina. So we were actually in Asheville on Thursday night before the storm hit Friday morning, and it was a really neat experience. We visited a small 110 cow raw milk dairy in Virginia. We saw plenty of other raw milk farmers that we know up in Pennsylvania, and I think that movement is here, and it's here to stay. And it stays relatively small and local, right? And that's exactly what it needs to be. Again, there's a higher calling here that I feel responsible for, and that's that young family across the country that wants A2 organic milk. And so a lot of those raw farms are maybe now moving towards A2 cows, and if they aren't, they should be, because that is also going to be more digestible to more people. And if you can't digest it or eat or consume dairy, then we're kind of, I think we're only seeing half the story there. So I believe our brand has a different purpose and a different reason, and we absolutely encourage everybody we can to do what we've done across the country, and we've helped some small farms, develop their own label and move forward, and I'm happy to do that. Right, we this is a big world and a big country, and there's a big market, and we're just touching it. And our goal was to sell all the milk from our farms, at a premium, and and to do service as many customers as we could. And in the last year, we've kind of achieved that goal. And so now we have been working with other farmers, say the next 5 dairy farms, and getting them to segregate their A2 cows and to certify their land regenerative, and change their thinking a little bit towards supporting our brand. And so we're now trying to do that more in a few other states, so that we can have a supply of milk that continues to feed our brand growth, right? Um, I just wouldn't feel comfortable saying we have a limited supply and stand in line or pay more or whatever you have to do when you get in that situation.
So for the end consumer, and say they're not able to, they go to the grocery store and they're not able to buy your milk, what are some questions they could ask a dairy farmer to really help ensure they're getting good quality milk?
I think A2 is the first question. Yeah. And when we started on the A2 path, nobody knew what it meant. It was just a foreign concept. You couldn't buy the semen to breed your cows that was A2 selected. And so we had to go to New Zealand to get all our semen for a lot of years. Um, and so I think that would be the first question, the A2. And then it's the cleanliness of your farm. And that one's hard to know, right? Milk changes every day. You have a different set of bacteria counts from your milk tank, and you never know what happened last night. What the employee or what the cow did, and what happened inside the milk, and so that's a difficult one. I certainly think that you know the consumer needs to see the farm, whether that's virtually on the computer or website or whatever. But if the farm's nearby, drive out there and visit it. We absolutely always encourage people to come see our farm. Our doors are wide open. We've had mostly positive experiences. And we aren't perfect. There's days when you might see something that you don't like. you know Things happen. We've got a lot of live animals that get sick, and some occasionally die. And we're some things we do are dirty because there's manure involved. And but that's life, and we're not trying to hide any of that. And so we have bird watchers that come by the carload and sometimes the bus load on our farms. And they're literally here every day. And then wildlife comes because they like the way we manage our fields, and so it's really exciting.
Thank you for sharing. My next question then, with that too, with the actual containers stored for the milk, because I know folks have questioned on just that. What's the reasoning behind the containers that you chose?
Sure. Yeah. So the majority of our milk in the beginning was in plastic bottles that we had designed. And that was an extremely thoughtful process. We're absolutely fans of glass. However, when you get into the retail stores, the employees that work in the store that have to accept those at the front counter and then move them to the back of the store and track them and hold them for a week and until somebody picks them up, because that is those bottles are cycling back and forth, and I understand it's about eight rounds or 8 returns. And so there's a negative to that, and the second negative is that you're hauling a lot more weight in two directions with the heavier glass bottle. But when we looked at the plastic bottle, we were looking for a product that resembled what an old glass bottle used to look like. And so we literally had our bottles designed and paid for the molds to have those bottles put together. We then put PET, the highest quality PET plastic in there, so it's fully recyclable. And we've got a UV filter in our bottle so that our milk isn't oxidized by the lighting that is in the glass, the dairy case. And so our milk is not getting oxidized, which is a huge advantage over those clear glass bottles. And that would be why you normally don't see milk in clear containers, because it does oxidize at a quick rate, especially with fluorescent lighting that is usually in those dairy cases. So we thought that, on balance, we made a very healthy, conscious, environmentally sound move in going into these plastics. At the same time, Amazon's Department for Sustainability or something had done a study, on packaging and containers, and they came up with single-use plastic as a more secure method for our environment, which is absolutely counterintuitive. In other words, throw it away and bury it in the landfill was a better option than pretending to haul it around the country and ship it across an ocean for recycling, where they end up dumping it at the other end. And that was really shocking. So we kind of had that in mind as well. But the real beauty to being in plastic is you can carry 6 bottles in your arms, and if you drop one, you can pick it up and keep moving. And literally, that I did that yesterday morning, and it happens all the time. And our people in the shelves and at retail, the bottles get dropped, and there's no cleanup on aisle 5 when you drop one of ours.
Yeah, I figured definitely that last part would be a major factor because me personally, this was early February of this year. I Because I have a tagline with Raw's Law, and I ordered half-gallon glass jugs to just sell for folks that want to store milk within that. And I ordered about 800 of them, and it took 2 months. They finally got to my house, and they fell, and I lost a third of the supply, just like that.
Yeah.
And that's very costly. I mean, that took 2 months. So if you take that into account for something like what you're doing, very costly and time consuming, I had a feeling that would be one of the major reasons. And that's there's trade-offs for everything that you do. And like what you're saying with your goal of trying to provide this nation, or just provide it to folks, it's very difficult doing that in glass to where you're not losing an insane amount of money or product.
And then you got to haul those glass bottles home, which takes the same truck with a lighter load because they're now empty, but yet they're heavy, and so it's a logistical difficulty that we chose to avoid. And it's not perfect. It's like everything in life. There's give and take, and that's why we also pasteurize our milk. Because it's a safer option for our consumer.
And the cost too is just a really interesting thing of what people say versus what they actually pay for something. And I know for a lot of the folks that probably want glass, I don't know if they'd be willing to pay however much extra dollars it would be if you were to do that to scale. I doubt they'd be paying, let's say, just throwing out there $5 extra per order.
Right.
And then who loses in that you do. And so it's very fickle, and that's why I'm glad to have these discussions. Is it's very necessary because most folks just aren't aware of everything that goes into this whole process. And I think in terms of the process, that would actually be good to talk about too, because you mentioning rotating your cattle. I'd just be curious to hear what's the process like for your dairy cows and the milking process and all of that.
Sure. I think the first thing your listeners need to understand is our dairy cattle look different than normal dairy cattle. Most cattle are black and white Holsteins, and then the second breed is a cute little brown Jersey with large eyes, and those are the two breeds that we always had, and eventually started crossbreeding. And then you kind of get a chocolate version that's a medium sized animal. But we for a lot of years we've been crossbreeding for more than 25 years, and we used mostly all New Zealand genetics primarily when we first learned about A2, and their Holsteins are a little smaller. They're called New Zealand Friesians, and they're smaller because they're been selected for grazing and walking a long distance. And of course they have a Jersey and then an Ayrshire that we really liked, and so a three-way cross. And then 10 years ago we learned about, it's actually 10 and a half years, we learned about Fleck V, a breed from Germany, where we buy semen from Germany. And the Fleck V breed is a dual purpose breed, so these cows have been selected for years and years for both milk and meat production. And the thinking in our minds there was we were trying to find cows where we could not feed them grain and concentrates and this high calorie diet that is easy for them to gain weight on. We wanted them to make this omega 6-3 1-to-1 milk, and the Fleck V cow does that super well and efficiently, and stays and maintains her body condition, so she therefore stays healthy, and you know she's able to get pregnant and breed back and stay in the herd for a lot of years. And it's really a great system. In fact, there's a cow outside my window here, that we just put in our center island. We're having a party today, a quinceanera for this cow because she turned 15 in July. So we're having a big employee party at noon. And it's really a neat story. That cow was born and raised on our very first grass-fed dairy down in Eureka, California. That we call it Sea Mist. And she's 15 years old, and we just moved her up here this year, because I wanted to retire her in my yard where I get to see her every day. It's kind of a neat story.
I love that.
And she's a crossbreed, Holstein Jersey. We weren't doing Fleck V back then.
So with that, I guess how what's the milking process too then versus say how much time they're out roaming, enjoying the grass versus having to be milked or taken care of for other things.
Yeah, so I've mentioned we milk our cows at 5 locations, and those 5 locations, 2 of them are 100% grass fed, and 3 of them we feed small amount of grain. It might be 50% of what normal dairies would feed. But all dairies, all 5 of them are grazing cows twice a day during most of the grazing season. We're heading into the fall. It's now getting late in October, so we're only grazing once a day, and a handful of cows we've already locked in because we're running out of grass on the outside because the growing period is really short now on the day length. We only have about 11 hours of daylight, and it's getting cooler, and so grasses grow slower, and the fields literally need a rest. So like I said, over 300 days a year, our cows are out grazing at least once a day, and most of the time it's twice a day. And so every 12 hours, they have access to brand new pasture that might be 1.5 to 2 feet tall. And then they're out in the field for 8 or 10 hours, and then they walk back to the milk barn. And so they're continuously walking back to the milk barn twice a day to report to milking, if you will, where we harvest the milk and then let them go, and they walk back out to the next uh, break of grass that we've allocated in the field. And so they really enjoy the cycle. And after milking, they're in a hurry to get back because they know they've got new feed. Lush green pasture that's full of herbs and forbs and broadleaf and narrowleaf and just a whole lot of grasses and a lot of some clovers and just chicory and plantain and different things that we like to grow. And it's what gives a variety and all the phytonutrient differences that are in our milk that might be present in our products and not found in our competitions.
I'm curious in the scenario that one of the cows gets sick or injured. What happens in that case?
Yeah, so we're always looking for that. A common injury is just a cow gets a sore foot and walks slow. I just was with one of our herdsmen this morning driving around on a pickup, and I mentioned to him that I saw a cow in the maternity area that was limping, that didn't look right. Not only was she limping a little, but her foot was swollen a little. And he said, "Yeah, we treated her, and I'm not sure what they did treatment wise, but I said you might want to do it again because of the swelling. Something's not quite right." And so we're always looking and working towards that. If the injury can be fixed, we fix it. And sometimes it's time that fixes it, and sometimes it can't be fixed. And that's when we cull the cow or sell her off to the the meat industry, basically. And dairy cows are a big part of the United States meat industry, like hamburger and all the fast food chains and things like that. We also harvest some of those cows and sell our own burger at some farmers markets, and we have a small farm store here on the ranch, and so consumers get to share in our grass-fed beef.
I don't. I'd be curious with the topic of selling dairy cows for beef because I don't know if the majority of folks realize that. How does that even work? Because you yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. How does that process work for from transitioning from the dairy cows to just say
Yeah,
hamburger meat?
into the meat. Yeah, well, it's just it must work quite well. It's happening. 250,000 head of cattle per week are going from the dairy industry into the meat industry. So that's a big number. So that's about a million head per month.
Wow.
Yeah, and I believe that number is quite accurate. And and so about 50% of the United States meat industry is old dairy cattle. And when you get into like a 10-year-old dairy cow, I'm told that the flavor of the meat is more intense and a lot better. We've had a handful of markets, labels that buy old cows from us. So we'll take that old cow when she's no longer productive in our world. She milked her entire cycle out, did not get pregnant to start a new cycle, and so we may milk her for 2 years or 3 years off of just one calving, and then we'll put her out on grass for 2 or 4 months. We have a group that we're watching all the time, and we sell out of there, and that's pretty unique and special meat. And sometimes it's marketed as cuts of beef in retail stores, and they used to just call it old dairy cows. I think they literally use the word old, and they we first one market they wanted to start with a minimum of 10 years old. And so it's common around the world in different countries. This old dairy cow beef is tastier. So, and I would also venture to say it's going to be more nutritious, and it's a different thing. We've been sold, I'm going to say, a little bit of a story that grain-fed beef is, a juicy steak. Well, yeah, it might be juicy, but I don't think it's nutritionally dense. And those are really young animals that might only be 18 or 20 months old. And I don't I just don't believe that it's nutritionally dense. So
I agree with that, and I've had Stefan Van Vliet on my podcast and talked more on that too. So completely agree. I want to transition a little bit to the Make America Healthy Again initiative, and especially just from the perspective of you, the farmer. We'd just love to hear your thoughts just on this whole conversation because, again, we mentioned this before the podcast started. It, in my lifetime, I'm 30, and this is the first time to me that I've really seen someone as high up as Trump, essentially, and now with RFK, talking about this ever growing crisis. Because what I find so ironic about trust the science that's being shoved down our throats consistently, if everything they're telling us is true, then why is pretty much a lot of our health metrics continue to get worse? And the fact that pretty much 75% of our country is overweight and obese, and that trend continues to worse. Heart disease, cancer. I mean, my brother died from colon cancer, and I see articles all the time of it used to be from colon cancer is in your 50s to now it's in your 40s to soon 30s. And to me, it's given me a lot of hope and drive. So I would just love to hear your perspective.
sure. Yeah, one of my best friends 20 years ago, he and I used to argue a lot. He's a large scale dairy farmer, and we grew up in the same area and had been friends for 50 years. And I'm now in my 60s, and we were moving in this organic direction, and he was arguing with me a lot. Just he likes to argue. I love to argue, and we fought a lot about the health and the health of our country. And I am so glad that Callie and Casey Means are out there setting the record straight with truth about how the the health of our country isn't what we think it is. And my buddy used to always, call out the statistics that people are now living longer. Well, sure they are, but you're 30 and you had a brother that died from cancer. That shouldn't happen. He was a young man, right? And so there's something wrong, and
Well,
it's so
and to even just add to that, whenever they say live longer, but they're not, a lot of those people aren't even
yeah,
living. They're just getting
no,
by with
yeah,
15 medications and sitting on their couch watching TV all day. That's not
yeah,
living.
yeah, no, and the obesity is just out of control, and so yeah, it just boggles my mind as well that Democrats and Republicans are coming together to get behind a statement of "Make America Healthy Again." And amen. That's what Stephanie and I and our kids and our family of employees has been trying to do, and it just absolutely feels wonderful. And so I'll just tell you a little inside story there. When Bobby Kennedy was running as a presidential candidate and he chose Nicole Shanahan as his running mate, we were pretty excited because we knew her. She had reached out to us in 2020, I guess, just before COVID, about February, and met with her on March 2nd. COVID hit that week and the next week, and she called and wanted to be an angel investor in our brand. And it was because her and her husband at the time had a young daughter that had some health issues, and they really needed A2 milk, and they were getting an infant formula from around the world somewhere and learned about our brand. And so we were doing weekly deliveries to her house. Of course, she hated the fact that we were in plastic, so she would then just pour it into glass containers as soon as it got there. And I just thought that was clever. Well, at least she's willing to, accept the plastic that far. But Bobby chose her as a running mate, and then I know now she's been out visiting farms in the last year, and she visited Will Harris out at White Oak, and he and I know Will really well, and some other friends here in California. And so here we are now. They're all coming together, and now she's batting on a different team for the same cause, the same reason, right? We want healthier environment, we want healthier food, we want a healthier planet, we want healthier people, and we're making unhealthy people at an extremely fast rate, and we've just had our head in our rears ignoring that. And so, hats off to Callie and Casey Means for kind of bringing that to the world through an interview with Tucker Carlson originally, and then now with Joe Rogan most recently, but they're behind the scenes coaching Donald Trump, which is just shocking that this is happening. And I'm just really proud of being able to watch that happen. People need to know.
Absolutely. And I'm curious too, do you, from your perspective too, um, because one of the reasons I have this podcast and this brand is A, to really help educate and raise awareness, but B, is to give you all a voice again. And I'd be curious, does this feel like that's helping in a lot of ways too, to where it's just bringing agriculture back to America essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. It does. It's you and a lot of other podcasts, right, are focusing on uh, nutrition and food and regenerative agriculture and whatever that might mean. And of course, the farmers need to be the heroes of this story, right? Gabe Brown with a cape on, being a superstar is absolutely the case. And in fact, Gabe Brown has a new TED Talk out that's just awesome. I watched it on Monday a week ago, and it's it is happening. It's probably happening at a much slower rate than I wish it was, but it's happening. And I think that you know this "Make America Healthy Again" campaign, if they're successful in the election and get an opportunity to really put people in place across the country and in Washington D.C. that understand regenerative agriculture. And let me just be clear, when I say understand regenerative agriculture, that means that you understand the biology and the soil and how it works and how all the conventional additives harm that and harm the food and so that all has to be replaced with healthy, clean, healthy food that is eventually could be certified organic. But getting it regenerative and on that track and moving farmers from one model to the next is extremely important. I had the privilege of speaking to the American Farm Bureau annual convention 3 different times about um, health and soil, and the last title I put on that was "Honor Soil as You Would Your Grandchildren." And we need to honor soil and raise it up to be better and raise it up to be all that it can possibly be. We've been abusing soil in this country for about 7 or 8 generations and growing yields, better, faster, cheaper, with a complete disregard for our environment and our soil and our health.
It's wild. I read the book Dirt, Erosion of Civilizations, and that really opened my eyes to just the history of humankind and how we've, in terms of agriculture, a lot of the stuff that we've done throughout time, and nature always responds in the same way. And now we're back to where we're at with this. I think this is a good segue into, say, a listener who has wanted to, they might have a piece of land or they're interested in leasing a piece of land to add a dairy cow, and the economics of it all. What can we expect for someone that wants to have just say one dairy cow to support themselves and maybe their surrounding community?
Well, uh, I would always say this to anybody: manage your soil regeneratively, whether it's a potted plant in your house or your garden in your backyard or your lawn. Manage it regeneratively. And so if you have a half an acre or an acre and you're going to have a cow on it, manage it regeneratively. And so start there. We sell individual cows to consumers all the time. So we pick out a young A2 cow that is friendly enough to be on a halter and in somebody's backyard. We sold 2 of those last week. They went to the same person. My daughter takes care of the sale. And turns out she told me it was a billionaire from California who does something, 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 and I don't remember any of the story, but it's just incredible that this billionaire is sending a couple of employees, 7 or 8 hours away to go pick up a couple of cows so that he can have, fresh raw milk in his backyard. And
I mean, that just goes to show. I mean, even that it's truly an awakening right now.
yeah,
That's
yeah, and you don't need to be a billionaire to buy a $3,000 cow. It's so just need to make that clear. But we encourage that. We just figure that we're doing our share, right? And if you can't do it, then you can buy a bottle of our milk somewhere.
how much land realistically do you need for one dairy cow?
I would think a couple of acres is better, and of course, it always depends on your context of your situation, and what type of land you have, what your environment is. If you live in the desert, or if you have irrigation and water, you need to water your grass and keep it green. Brown grass doesn't. That's not part of God's plan. Brown grass needs to be stepped on, trampled down, and laid down so that the biology in the soil can consume it and take that carbon back into the soil. Um, and so it needs to be green and growing with living roots. And that's the goal, right? If you live in a climate where winters are really harsh and your soil's in the freezer all winter, that's fine. Then you need to have some stored hay and stored feeds for your animal. But I would think a couple acres is much better than 1 acre, and but anything can work.
So I'm going to transition to the final topic I have for today. So like I mentioned, for me personally, I want to start my ranch down the road and raise my future family there. And so I'd be a first generational rancher. For you mentioning that for fifth, but then also your children within are working together. How have you been able to, or I guess, how do you go about raising your children on the farm to where, keeping the legacy at play? Because especially in America with so many family farms closing, it's really hard to keep it in the name for so many reasons. And you mentioning how, growing up, you just loved it. Yeah, how have you gone about that? Because for me, I obviously long term would love to pass my future ranch down to my future children, but I'm not going to force that if they don't want that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was important to us as well, right? Never force it, never really assume it out loud. um, but I'll tell you this. My advice, the secret code to raising good kids is to try and try every single day. I've watched a lot of people raise kids, and I literally don't think that some people are trying to raise good kids. And when I say raising good kids, you've got to raise good adults. And so, the kid phase is over in 2 or 3 years. Now you're working on raising adults. And too many people, too many parents hang on to the kid thing, and then they try to raise a friend. And that's not our job as parents. We're here to raise healthy children that can communicate with other people in society and create their own friends. But it's a parent's job to teach them right and wrong. And then from a farming, kind of this worldview that God created us to be in family units and to live off of the earth, then having that backyard cow or goat or five of them, and chickens and things like that, where your children have an opportunity to participate in feeding the family, that's everything. That's absolutely everything. And I just think, again, it's trying every day to raise these responsible adults. That's the end goal. And there's a lot of pain to get from here to there. But that's how I've approached it. We feel extremely blessed to have kind of right now, three out of our oldest three kids are married and they have kids of their own and they're all working full time for us. And number four has been here for a lot of years and he just took a job yesterday. He's into computers and we don't need a programmer in house, and so he's going to work for another company, which is we're really excited about that. And then our youngest daughter went away to college and never really came home, and she works at a John Deere dealership type event rental place in Sacramento, California. And they're all in ag, and we really love that. I think they love agriculture, and they felt the responsibility of trying to do the right thing and help society and contribute in a positive light.
You mentioning for yourself, the work has just been so rewarding. And I guess my final question would be, what makes it so rewarding, and what makes it that you love everything that you've been doing, especially since you were born and raised into this world? Yeah, what makes you love it so much?
I, for me, being a farmer is extremely rewarding. It's challenging, it's hard, it's work, and it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for sissies. And so you got to step up, and the blessings come from that you can look back at the end of a week or the end of a day or the end of a life and see the results of your work, and that might come in now in this regenerative concept with improved soil and improved yields. And our grasses that we kind of monitor our yield per acre in terms of how many pounds or tons of dry matter are we growing. And on our best soils now, we're somewhere between 8 and 9 tons of dry matter per year. In Pennsylvania, it might be half that, but that's not because they're not doing a good job. It's because their soil's in the freezer so long in the winter. And so we have an incredible growing period out here on the California climate mild coast that we're on. And so we're cool in the summer and we're warm in the winter. And so it allows us to do better. Now, if I go to our neighbors' lands that are literally just on the other side of the fence, they might only be growing 2 tons of dry matter per acre per year in a program where they're not trying very hard and they don't understand soil and they don't understand rotational grazing of any kind that would be management intensive, where you eat it down hard and then you rest it. And so their roots are shallow, their forage is not very tall, and their soil's not very awake. And so the fact that you can take 2 tons of dry matter per acre and turn that into 8 is really, really exciting for me. And so once you learn how to do that, it's like you want to do it more and more. And then you can grow food that consumers can benefit from, and it's really exciting and rewarding. And that's the entire package or picture of what we're doing here at Alexandre Family Farm, is trying to bring the healthiest products from the healthiest soil to ultimately healthy consumers.
That's exactly why I try to push folks to shake a rancher's hand, shake a farmer's hand, because you don't know where that could lead to. I mean, for me personally, it led to wanting to start my own ranch long term, to where I know I will, because it's so rewarding and it's something that I didn't realize I'd been missing out so much on. Um, so again, thank you so much for joining. This was amazing, and thank you for everything that you and your family do and have been doing, because me and so many others are very appreciative. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome, Ryan, and thank you for your part in the process, and thank you to all your listeners for their part in listening and paying attention, and being consumers of great products. Right? That's their role. Right? Consumers vote every day with their dollars, and we need them voting in the right direction.
Amen. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.